Everything we do with
Welcome to Every Church a Peace Church, a program that promotes the belief that the church could turn the world towards peace if the church lived and taught as Jesus lived and taught. My name is Don Edwards. I'm the host and producer of this program. And I want to take the time at the top of this program just to thank all the viewers and support that I've received from producing this show. I hope you've enjoyed the guests that we have provided. We seek to provide you with informative, knowledgeable guests about the issues facing today, about issues of faith, peace, justice, issues that need to be discussed in a very candid way. And we have a very important guest to share with you today. You've heard the expression about walking the walk and talking the talk. My guest today is Damu Smith, a brother who has been active in the areas of justice, environmental justice, peace, for much of his adult life. I'm happy to introduce to you Brother Damu Smith, who is the founder of Black Voices for Peace, which is an organization headquartered in Washington, D.C. He is also the executive director of the National Black Environmental Justice Network and national organizing consultant for the National African American Tobacco Prevention Network. Damu,
glad to be here.
Welcome to Every Church a Peace
Church.
Church.
Be here.
I'm glad to have you. I know that you've been on programs such as Bill Moyers Now and C-SPAN and Paul Azan, and I welcome you to this program.
This is the most important program I've been on to date.
Oh, well, here's a little money under the table. I appreciate you being here and coming from Washington to share what you have, your vision for Black Voices for Peace, and discussion of how we can activate, particularly the African American community in the times that we have of war, peace, and faith. Tell our audience a little bit about the starting of Black Voices for Peace. What motivated you to start this particular mission?
Well, we were founded in the immediate aftermath of the tragic events of 9/11, and we wanted to forge a black community progressive response to the tragic events of 9/11. The Bush administration's response to what happened in New York and Washington, D.C., and the crash of the plane in Pennsylvania was to talk about, let's strike back. Let's have a military response and not look deeper and not probe deeper into the reasons that brought about those attacks. Why would those men from Arab countries, allegedly, get on those planes and ram them into buildings, killing themselves and hundreds of other people? Was it just because they didn't like our Western values, our Western democratic values? Was it because they were fanatics? Well, it might have been a mix of those two, but I have to tell you, it goes much deeper than that. People around the world, and I've traveled extensively around the world to nearly 50 countries in Africa, Asia, Latin America, Europe, and other countries, and I can tell you there are a lot of people who hate the United States. They hate our policies. They love our culture. They love the American people, but they hate our arrogance. They hate our bullyism. They hate our support for despotic and repressive regimes all over the world that are torturing people and violating human rights. So when we put that explanation in the mix, we have to have a different understanding behind what we need to do to respond to 9/11. Going through the Atlanta airport or another airport and being patted down and going through security and putting our shoes in those pans will do nothing to bring more security to the United States and its people. What we need to do is to work for justice and peace everywhere and have as a key cornerstone of our foreign policy support for democracy and human rights. And we cannot have those things unless our nation transforms radically its foreign policy.
Well, we've had on this program on several occasions Dr. C.T. Vivian. Dr. Vivian says that one of the most important things that he's learned, lessons that he's learned from the civil rights struggle, is that it takes radical love to overcome radical evil. And what we have found in our nation's response to this radical evil is another radical evil. And as it's often said, that violence begets violence.
Absolutely.
And
I was just saying again that the evil, evil produces evil, and so our nation's policies around the world
are evil.
Mm-hmm. It's systematically evil. We have a policy that trains military officers from other parts of the world to do bad things against their own people. And these, at the School of the Americas, Fort Benning, Georgia, we send these recruits back to their countries. And these people torture people. And they learn what they learn from our military. In Angola, where I've been, which has one of the highest per capita amputee rates in the world, because of the war that was fought there, the Civil War, which was fomented in large measure by U.S. policy when we supported the United Rebels through the Central Intelligence Agency, provided them $15 million plus. We provided the landmines. Those landmines that are blowing off the legs and the feet and the arms of young people who are walking around hobbling, say, made in the USA. We wonder why we're hated. We have to look at our support for the white minority regime in South Africa all of those years. We wonder why we're hated. Is because we do these things around the world. We wonder why we're hated because we support Israel's occupation of Palestine to the tune of $6 billion a year.
Of your money.
Of your and my tax money. And so when we think about this and put it all in context, we have to say we have to work for justice and transforming our nation's foreign policy. If I have to repeat this 1,000 times on this show today, I'll say that. We have to be in the streets. We have to be in the pulpits. We have to be organizing and speaking up for peace with justice.
Right. Well, what I hope this program does over the course of the life of this program is to say that 1,000 times. There is a reason for the reaction. And a lot of that information, the American people are just blissfully ignorant. They may not be well traveled. They may not be able to talk to the indigenous peoples in Guatemala and Ecuador and Angola, in Colombia, in the Philippines, and to find out why there is this format. A lot of people in the administration would like for the American people to believe that they're jealous of our richness, our resources,
our way of life,
our
democratic values.
Yes, but it's not jealousy. It's the use of American resources to really keep the people down, either through wars, through the support, as you've mentioned, of other repressive governments over the years, not this past 4 years, but over the past many years. I mean, we could go back to the beginning of the founding of America in terms of the oppression of indigenous peoples, and we've kept that attitude and kept that as a policy since the beginning. And you reap what you sow, and we must be able to change the seeds that we plant in the world so that we don't grow terrorists, and we don't grow those who react in a way that their parents and their grandparents died or were killed or were starved as a result of American resources, American planes, American mines.
That's right.
Let's talk about activism of the African American community, which is something that Black Voices for Peace attempts to do, does it not?
Absolutely. You know, I mentioned the events of 9/11 and how we started organizing. One of the things we didn't see on television as people were analyzing what happened on 9/11/2001 was Black voices. There were no Black voices, very few Black voices speaking on the television tube and on the radio, except for Black radio. But we weren't there talking. We weren't invited to participate. Lots of Black people died at the World Trade Center in New York. There were lots of Black people, including many Black children, on that plane that crashed in Pennsylvania. In fact, that plane in Pennsylvania was piloted by a Black pilot. the black people who died at the Pentagon in the Washington, D.C. area. In fact, someone who I know, his son, died at the Pentagon. So, we, like other people of color, perished on 9/11, and we have something to say. And we tend to see things through a different lens because of our experience here in America. We've been the victims of lynchings, church bombings, church burnings, Jim Crow racism, racial segregation, racial profiling, police violence, and brutality. We've been through it. And so we tend to see things through a different lens. And so we've been very supportive of this country, but we're much more critical. We're much more questioning. We ask more questions than the rest of the population because we've had a different kind of experience. And so our vision, our analysis, our interpretation, our perspective is needed as part of the public discourse and debate about where our nation needs to be going. And our nation right now is going in the wrong direction. We are embroiled in an evil war in Iraq that has killed nearly 1,000 young men and women from the U.S. military, wounded 5,000 more, many of them very seriously wounded, killed thousands of Iraqis, and it was all based on a pack of lies, based on false pretenses. We're now in a war not for weapons of mass destruction, not because of anything that had anything to do with 9/11, but because this administration wanted to overthrow Saddam Hussein, a man who they helped create through our policy. Many people don't know that. Read the history. The United States provided him with the know-how and the wherewithal to have chemical and biological weapons and tilted towards him diplomatically during the Iran-Iraq war.
And our Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, there's a well-known picture of him shaking
hands with Saddam Hussein
after this gas attack on the
they turned people. Our country turned a blind eye to what Saddam Hussein was doing, and then when he decided to disagree with us, we turned on him, and then we imposed 12 years of murderous, genocidal sanctions against Iraq that didn't hurt the Iraqi elite, but it hurt the masses of Iraqi people, including men, women, and children, hospitals, their healthcare system. And so the Iraqi people have been tremendously victimized by U.S. policy, which has been wrong-headed and wrong-sided. We're paying a heavy price for that. And now we see unraveling the policy. We're torturing Iraqi prisoners, most of whom were arrested not because they did anything to U.S. troops, because they were rounded up in sweeps.
Right.
And we have kicked in doors at the middle of the night at 3 a.m. We have disrespected the culture. Our young men and women over there, they don't know the language, they don't know the culture, they don't know the religion, they don't know the neighborhood, and they're over there doing bad things, not because they're evil, but because they are part of an evil policy executed by our government at the highest levels. And it's our job to get in the streets and in the pulpit and preach for peace with justice. We can't have peace without justice. And we got to have justice in the Middle East, justice right here at home. And we're not going to have justice at home as long as we're spending $400 billion a year on this war. And that's money that would never go for education, health care, hospitals, justice, environmental protection, affordable housing here at home. We've got to connect the dots, as Dr. King taught us to do, and work against racism, militarism, and economic oppression.
Right. The three
triplets of evil.
That's right. Damu, in terms of organizing and your history of organizing and activism, particularly on the current issues of peace, is there any particular uniqueness or issues involving the activating the African American community? Now, let me explain. What I see is in the protest movements, not only voices of mostly non-black people, but in the marches and in the organizations, there's not a representative numbers of African Americans involved in the peace activism. It's not as if they don't support these notions that we should be in peace and not support this war, but to get them out of the houses and into the streets, even though the impact of using the resources away from the domestic concerns and put them into death and destruction impacts the African American community in such devastating ways. How do we activate the African American community to be more active, to step out of the house and into the streets? How do we get the African American clerical leadership, the same type of leadership that led us out of the streets and out of the homes and into the streets during the 50s and 60s and 70s? What are some of your suggestions on that?
Well, first of all, it's important for our viewers to know that blacks are overwhelmingly against this war. All of the polls show that we are more against the war than any other segment of the population. The numbers hover around 80% plus among African Americans against the war. What we've got to do is to translate that sentiment into concrete action in the streets and in suites, for us to take concrete action to make sure that our members of Congress, our elected officials, and the President of the United States knows, and these corporations that are supporting this war know that we are against it. Now, you're right, we have not been out in the streets in overwhelming numbers, but many of us have been out in the streets. And black leadership black civil rights leadership has been speaking out against the war in various ways. But you're right, we need to bring out more black people and more clergy. And the way to do that is, I think, is we've got to educate our community about our direct interest in this. First of all, black troops are dying in Iraq like everybody else. We're dying. On the front page of a recent article on Iraq in the New York Times, there was a photo of a young black woman lying on her back on a Humvee, blood on her right leg. Her right arm was blown off at the forearm. She was guarding the facility in Baghdad, and a rocket was fired. And the Times article described her wailing and screaming because of the pain. And there are many other photos that have appeared in the paper showing black troops that have been wounded. Many black troops have come home. When Ted Koppel did his listing of the dead, I looked at the photos, and more than half of those who have been killed are people of color, including African Americans. So we have a direct stake in preventing our young people from being taken from the streets, going into the military, and then going to some foreign adventure of war and military proudness on the part of our government, and getting caught up in this insane, mad foreign policy, and then coming back in body bags. And it's not enough for our preachers to talk about the wonderful funeral they gave for Ray Ray or Bebe or Tamika. What's important is for them to talk about how they did work in serving as Jesus served, and to speak up for justice and peace, and to prevent our young people from first having to go into the military in the first place by working for economic justice at home. We're dealing with the career opportunity draft and the economic draft. That's why our young people go into the National Guard and into the military. They don't go there to go and kill people. They go there for those reasons. Now that they've gone in, they get caught up in this military machine, and the proudness of our military machine dictated by the nature of our foreign policy. So we've got to educate people about the economic impact of the war on the black community, about the fact that we are dying too. We've got to show it visually. And we have already proven through Black Voices for Peace that black people can be organized. We have put black people in the streets in Washington, D.C.
Well, I'm proud to say that I was involved in activating over 11, I think it was about 12 churches and 1,000 people on September the 30th, 2001, when we marched down Cascade Road in Atlanta on short notice. That did show there was the energy, the potential there to organize this innate knowledge that we have that what we're doing is wrong.
And it's how it's done, too. Let me tell you something. On Sunday morning, if all of the preachers somehow miraculously woke up and said, I'm going to talk about peace today, and did it on a consistent basis, I guarantee you we have more people out in the streets against this war. And if black preachers did that, we have more black people out against this war. We must use the power that we have on Sunday morning to move people and educate people. We've got to do that.
Well, if you're a Christian, then you should follow Jesus. Jesus is known as the Prince of Peace.
Well, anybody who has read the four Gospels understands that Jesus was an organizer.
Right.
And the four Gospels is like reading an action flick. And Jesus was everywhere, healing the sick, feeding the hungry, working. He organized his crew, the disciples, to make sure that they understood that they had to have the faith to do what was necessary to do justice and to make sure that we did not have people people who were hungry, people who didn't have health care. So that's what Jesus was all about. We have to serve as Jesus served in our churches. And that means we have to have social justice and action ministries that are serving the poor and the working class people and meeting the needs of people who are in need and who are marginalized and oppressed.
Above all else.
That's right. That's what Isaiah tells us. Yeah. And so we have to do these things, and we have to do them now. And this is very urgent. Our world and nation and neighborhoods are in crisis. Our young people are dying right in our neighborhoods because of the symptoms of the violence of poverty. And the violence of poverty produces desperation, and desperation produces violent acts of people wanting to steal from one another, and when we want to rob and steal, we want to shoot. And I don't want to justify any of this or excuse it, but the conditions of poverty and desperation brings this about. Yes. Obviously, we need to instill within our young people, within our community, better values so that even with economic dislocation in our lives, we wouldn't do that. But desperate conditions lead to desperate acts. And also on both ends, in Iraq and right in our neighborhoods, we have a situation where we are dying. So that's why in Black Voices we say peace in the hood, peace on the land, and peace in the world. We want peace in our neighborhoods, which means we got to have justice in our economics. We got to eliminate poverty. We got to have peace on the land, no environmental destruction and environmental degradation, which is poisoning our water and our air and our land. We've got to have peace in the world. And we got to connect the dots to understand the interconnectedness and the interdependence of these issues, because they all meet together.
Yes.
They all meet together. And when we talk about it that way, when you do it that way, black people are much more responsive, because I have to say, the predominantly white-led peace organizations don't always do it this way. And so black people will say, hey, we're with you, brothers and sisters, but they stay at home. And a lot of that has to do with the history of racism and the peace movement, too. You know, the peace movement has ignored our people. So we have to understand that as well.
Well, the mission that you've undertaken is a very important one, Damu, and it's one that really does get to the points that must be taken, justice. And that the black
no justice, no peace.
No justice, no peace, and that's not a slogan. That's a reality.
That's a formulation. That's a formulation for how we're going to have to bring peace in the world.
In the world, because if there's injustice, I mean, I would ask that many of the listeners of this program, and maybe those that don't listen to this program, to just visualize a flipping where it is the Iraqi soldiers busting down the doors of Americans in the middle of the night and occupying neighborhoods and shooting at our churches. Would this result in some type of reaction, a violent reaction? I would say that it would. And to expect otherwise is not being real. Now, what has to happen, as you've explained, is that we've got to do a radical readjustment of the nation's values.
Yes.
The nation prides itself on a certain value and a certain ethic, but there's a value that's discussed and displayed, but there's also a value that's hidden. There's a value that was revealed in the prison guards at Abu Ghraib prison and other places. There's values of American values that are oppressing colored peoples around the world that we don't know about.
That's right. And the torture at that prison in Iraq and other prisons in Iraq and Afghanistan and Guantanamo, that was not an isolated incident. And we need to stop talking about this being un-American and we Americans don't do that. That's not true. We did this in Vietnam. We massacred, U.S. troops massacred 500 men, women, and children at My Lai. People have to remember that. Right. They shot 2-year-old children at point-blank range. U.S. troops did this early in the morning when people were rising
from helicopters.
Well, no, they were there in the village. with pistols. They were shooting people.
Yeah.
And then in the Phoenix program, the United States rounded up 25,000 people who were interrogated. Many of them never made it out alive. So this is not an aberration. But we don't have to go that far. Right here in our own prisons in America, black and Latino prisoners are treated this way. So this is not an aberration. This is what we do. This is what our military people have done, what the CIA has done around the world. And people need to know this.
Yes.
But when people know this, and we have to tell the truth, that's what the Bible tells us to do. You know, you shall seek the truth, and the truth shall set you free. And that's why that young man, that young white man who decided to reveal the truth about this, he's a hero.
Yes.
And you know why he said he did it? He said, because I'm a Christian.
Yes.
He said, I'm a Christian, and I know that this is wrong, and I'm going to tell this. And as a result of that, one Christian doing the right thing has led to the unraveling of so much of what's happening in America.
The American value must incorporate the Christian value, the true Christian value of compassion, forgiveness, and most importantly, love.
That's right.
Love of friends and of enemies.
And these are universal spiritual values.
Yes.
Any creed or religion can adhere to these things.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Damu, I want to thank you so much. Time goes so quickly when we're engaged, and I know that you'll be back. You agreed to come back and share with us. If you want more information about Black Voices of Peace, Black Voices for Peace, please go to the website, which should be shown on your screen. And of course, if you want more information about Every Church a Peace Church, then we have a website. We invite you to go through that website, spend some time, go through and search any number of different topics and people. Damu is on there, and just engage yourself, learning about what you need to learn about what's going on in the world, and learn issues of faith, compassion, peace, and love. As I close the show, thank you so much for being with us. I want you to seek peace, find peace, and be peace. Thank you for watching Every Church a Peace Church.
How long will it take till we realize we made a big mistake? If we turn our back on us, and how long will it be till the world can finally see that they turn their back on love? From one to another, it's time to uncover the meaning of it all. So here it is. We are here 'cause we are family, living all together.